Well, good morning. Here we go. Good, because I'm a preacher's daughter, so I like some interaction. I'm really excited to have this conversation with JUMP and the National Basketball Social Justice Coalition about how we can literally take story and redemption for change. And so before we get into our dynamic conversation, we actually want to play a video from JUMP for everyone.
Young adults are our future. They bring a perspective and a point of view that we absolutely must hear. First and second chances matter because in many ways it is the story and the arc of America and the arc of American democracy.
JLA stands for the JUMP Leadership Accelerator, which is an exploration of careers in policy and advocacy work. And so we decided to partner with the NBA to work with them on their advocacy and policy campaigns, while at the same time creating worker-based learning for youth across the country, ages 18 to 25. The JLA program is really about demonstrating and giving them the opportunity to show their value proposition and show why it's important to invest in the youth, because the youth represent tomorrow.
For the Social Justice Coalition, we believe in the power of partnerships. At the end of the day, just like basketball, making a difference in the world is a team sport. And the JUMP Leadership Accelerator is exactly that. We're working with our partners from the Justice and Upward Mobility Project and Jobs for the Future to create a place where young people can come and build and develop their skills to take it to the next level. These young people are the future of this work. They're the ones who are going to carry the flame of social justice into the future.
I love seeing that video because I had the pleasure of meeting those 7 leaders who are so inspiring, and I think that really sets us up for this conversation around the work that you all are doing at the intersection of sports, culture, and iconic brands. And you all, and I'm gonna ask this to Larry and James, you've taken these iconic brands and said, we wanna be at the forefront of changing not only the narrative around justice-impacted talent, but actually making sure we're changing the trajectory. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Larry, don't make me go before you, young lady.
You know, I'm gonna defer to you and Ken throughout this.
Well, I'll just say from the NBA community standpoint and the National Basketball Social Justice Coalition, the work that we do is all about bringing people together. And the whole impetus for the creation of the coalition was the players, coaches, team governors, and executives from across our community who said, there's more that we can do to drive justice in all of the NBA markets that we have across the country. And second chances in criminal justice are one of the places where we see the most progress, the most possibility. And in particular, like, people of all different perspectives beginning to understand that there's opportunity, that there's a chance for us to move forward. So being able to leverage what we do, which is bringing people together around the game that we all love, but also being able to focus attention on the ways that we can make a difference and give people second chances, that's the value. We know that there are so many frontline workers, government folks, people in civil society who've been in these fights. The question is, what can we do from our unique perch? And what we can do is drive attention, lift up stories, make sure that we are investing in narrative change.
Yeah, I would just add to that, the fact that we've got these brands like the NBA, like our brand, we're using those platforms to actually enhance the message getting out, because at the end of the day, we want to deliver a message about providing opportunities for people. And I'm going to use my quote that I found out where it actually came from last night. But one of the things that we talk quite a bit about is, I heard a quote a while ago that said, in this world, talent is distributed equally, but opportunity is not. And to me, once I heard that, and it was actually in a commercial for Southern New Hampshire University, and once I heard that, that really resonated with me, because we see all the time, or know all the time, that there are a ton of people out here who have incredible talent, and just are not in a position to be able to exercise or use that talent in a positive way because of the situation that they happen to be in. And so our goal is to provide opportunities, and I think The young men that you saw here, we were actually be able to provide opportunities for these young men to develop, to build a career. That's the goal for us, to take advantage of opportunities or provide opportunities for people.
Yeah, closing the gap between talent and opportunity. I mean, there's a statistic that there are 80 million justice-impacted people locked out of work. 80 million justice-impacted people. Like that, to me, just, I think about the solutions that could be created from folks if they just had, to your point, the opportunity. And so, Ken, I want to go to you before we talk about programs. Like, we should talk about what we're really fighting, not just a jobs gap, but also the stigma around that. Can you talk about how all of that is related? I think, Larry started touching on it, and we saw a little bit in the video, but love for you to talk on that connection.
Sure. So when we think about the stigma, or what they call the scarlet letter, that's in essence really what we're advocating for, is to change the narrative in this country about how talent is viewed and about what it means to actually be involved with the justice system. As you mentioned, 1/3 of American adults have touched the justice system in one form or another, or have some form of an arrest record. That's predicted to be, by the Justice Department, 100 million people by the year 2030. That's 36% of the workforce. And so if we live in a society where 94% of companies are doing background checks, the question is why? And whether those background checks are necessary, and whether we are actually evaluating the background check process in the right way to give people to maximize opportunity to give to people. And so when you think about stigma, we're trying to unwind that stigma. And we think through storytelling, through messaging, through programs like JLA, through stories like Larry's book, we can continue to chip away at the narrative to normalize the fact that sometimes people make poor decisions in their life, and they should be given a second or third or even fourth opportunity to redeem themselves and also be a part of the economy and be able to earn a living.
I want to pull out on the piece that you were talking about. You listed some of these stats, 1/3 of the country, over 37%. That means all of us have been touched by the justice system, right? Can you help us understand how to make this real for people, right? Like how they should, get inspired to actually help be part of these solutions we're talking about, whether it is from changing hiring practices to helping shift the narrative through culture change. What can folks do to actually make some of this real?
Yeah. Thanks for that. I think what's challenging but also exciting to me is there's no one approach that's going to solve this problem. When you look at big social movements in this country, these struggles are protracted. And they take a multi-pronged approach to actually be able to change the script about the way culture operates. And so when I look at this particular problem, how do you unwind the stigma attached to somebody who has a felony conviction? Well, you have to perform well, because there's a devaluation on justice-impacted talent. We as a society tend to believe that people who have been impacted by the justice system have less of a value than someone who graduates from Stanford or Berkeley or some other university, and that's just simply not true. The statistics bear that out. Larry's a prime example of that, which is why we're on the stage today. The second thing we need to do is we need to educate people, right, about people's life circumstances. It's not a binary decision that somebody makes on a given day to get involved with the justice system. There's usually a whole lot of life circumstances that accompany that, and most people don't understand that. They look at it just at a surface level, and they don't understand that behind every single record there's actually a human story. And we haven't done a good enough job trying to understand what those stories are and making sure people can avoid those snares and traps that happen in their individual life and in their community. I think also policymakers play a big role in this, of changing the narrative. Currently, there's 40,000 plus laws and regulations that stop people from becoming active in the American economy because of justice involvement. Why is that? Who created those laws? What were the decisions that went into that? Usually it's fear. It's somebody that says, like, I don't want this person to be able to cut hair because they get to pick up a pair of scissors, even though they require people to become barbers and pick up scissors in the prison environment, right? And so we have to demystify that, and it's a long process. It's, to quote Nipsey, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And we're prepared for the marathon. That's what we're training for every single day. We're in the gym working out, we're running the laps, we're running the miles necessary to make sure we get across the finish line and do this. And then I think the other piece is we mentioned at the top, is the storytelling. like the storytelling of these youth, continually finding the best and the brightest of people who have touched the justice system to actually show a different side of the equation versus what's on TV shows like The Wire or Snapped or any of these Dateline shows. I mean, there's actually a whole population out here that is doing amazing things, and we intend to tell those stories. And so it's a combination of each of those things together that actually are going to change the narrative in this country.
I mean, I think it's so powerful that you all have with these leaders. I told you, I've been talking about these leaders since I met them at the end of January. Not only teaching them how to be confident in telling their story and creating these culture campaigns that even I was like, I'm a 20-year some professional, and they were coming up with amazing campaigns that blew all of our minds. And then also teaching them that importance of advocacy with policy leaders. That's so incredibly important what you all are doing. You touched on this a little bit about, Larry, your story. And you know, a lot of us were introduced to you, Larry, either as president of the Jordan brand or president of the Trailblazers, but you decided to actually write about your story. And if you could share a little bit why that was so important and what led you to that, and how, honestly, I feel like that it has been a catalyst for a broader cultural shift and investment in this work.
So for 30 plus years building my career, I hid from my past. I didn't share it with very many people at all. But my oldest daughter continually over the years inspired me to share my story.
Vaughn told you.
I used to say, she did. I used to say she pushed me. She was like, Dad, stop saying that, please. But she inspired me to share my story, and she convinced me that it could be beneficial, could be motivational, inspirational to some folks. And so her and I actually worked on it together. And the main reason that I decided to do it is because I believe that my story could show folks, initially it was to show folks who were incarcerated or on their way out or have been in the system, to provide some hope for them, to say, you know, your life is not over. You can still build a life, even though you've had this situation that you've dealt with. I was reluctant to do it, very reluctant to share it, but I'm really glad that I did. One of the things that I found out was that there are a lot of people out here who are working in this area, who are trying to improve the situation with the criminal justice system, who are trying to improve opportunities for people to be able to come home and build a life. And so, you know, to me, it's just incredible, and it's important work. One of the things that I'm kind of proud of is that Harvard Business School took my book and built a case study on it. And they did an incredible job of building context around the story. And one of the things that they did, they had a chart in there that showed that at the time, the recidivism rate was 77%, meaning that within 2 to 3 years, 77% of people get out and are back in the system. But what it also showed was that if people were able to develop or acquire some type of marketable skill set where they could actually come home and get a job and be able to take care of their families, give back to their communities, people then from the 77% dropped to 30%. That was more than in half, cutting that recidivism rate more than half. And it showed that if you had a bachelor's degree, if people got a bachelor's degree, it dropped to 6%. With a master's degree, it was at 0. So to me, this was clear indication that if people are able to get an education, learn some type of marketable skill set, they don't go back to jail and they don't commit crimes. And to me, if we can reduce the recidivism rate, to me, I believe it will reduce overall crime because, you know, majority of crime is being committed by people who have already been in the system. And if we can reduce that, that would be great. For me, I had an opportunity my last time I was incarcerated to get an education. The jail I happened to be in had a college program there. I had already gotten my GED another time I was in jail. But they had a college program there where you could take classes inside the jail. And then you could qualify to actually move into trailers that were outside the jail wall, live in those trailers, and leave every day and go to school and have to be back by 8 o'clock at night. I got in that program and I got my associate's degree through that program. But what it did is give me a head start coming out, because one of the biggest challenges I think people coming out of the system have is, okay, so what do I do now? Where do I go from here? And in a lot of cases, a lot of those folks, I would think the majority of those folks want to change their life. They want to do something different with their life, but they don't know what to do or how to do it. And for me, like I said, I was given an opportunity to start getting an education while I was still inside. I got my associate's degree while I was in that program, transferred the credits to Temple University, moved to a halfway house in North Philadelphia, got my bachelor's degree in accounting, of all things. As a criminal, I decided to get an accounting degree. Got my bachelor's degree in accounting, and as I was about to graduate, at the time there was what was called the Big 8 accounting firms, and if you were graduating with an accounting degree, the goal was to get hired by one. And I decided that there was one called Arthur Andersen that I was really interested in. Ended up going there, spending the whole day interviewing with a number of people. But all the time back in my mind, I'm thinking, should I share my story with these folks? Because all they knew is I was a young black man about to graduate with honors. They were interested, I was interested. So all day I'm thinking, should I share it? So finally I get to the last person, who is actually the hiring manager. And I decided to share my story with him. And as I'm telling my story, I could see his face changing, like not in a good way. And when I was done, he pulled an envelope out of his pocket and he said, you know, I have an offer letter here that I was all ready to give you, but I can't give it to you now. I wish you the best, but I can't give it to you. And at that point, it created a challenging situation for me, because my initial thought was, this is never going to work for me. With my criminal background, they're never going to let me build a professional career. I might as well go back to the street and go back to what I know. But I decided I wasn't going to do that. I was going to continue to push forward. But I decided that I wasn't going to volunteer the information at that point. I wouldn't lie about it if asked. I wasn't going to deny it, but I wasn't going to volunteer the information. And for 30 plus years, that's how I built my career. Wow. With people that I worked with, people I close enough with that I consider family, having no idea about my background.
Wow. I'm sure that hiring manager is like, oh, I made a big mistake, right?
Well, actually, I would, if I saw him today, I'd thank him.
Fair point, right? It gave you some information. And you now sharing your story, all of the work that's been happening in culture over the years is hopefully not putting other people in that position of having to decide between telling my full truth and actually having a job that will change the trajectory of my life.
I think it's much
life.
more challenging now. It would almost be impossible for me to do what I did because of background checks, because of so much information being available on the internet. If I was trying to, do that today, I don't think I'd be able to do it. But yeah, I would thank that guy, because I think my career turned out a little better than it might have if I...
I think it was okay. To that point, James, I want to ask you, why has it been so important for the NBA to invest in this work? And then coming from this kind of story, what is something that we really would like for business leaders to think about as they're engaging in hiring practices and engaging with potential talent?
Well, I think this is really a combination of what Ken talked about in terms of people being able to work on justice issues from different perspectives and lenses, and the power of a story and an example like Larry's. The NBA is a huge global brand, and a lot of people get excited when anybody from the NBA community comes into any space, but the immediate question asked afterwards is, why basketball, right? We love the interest, but why? And my answer on behalf of our coalition and the work that we do for the larger community is because it takes all of us. There is no social movement in the history of this world that has changed anything that hasn't done something differently. And so finding new paths forward, and in our case, trying to be a catalyst for the NBA community, but for sports media and entertainment, to find a space in the long-term policy-making solutions that we know we need for our challenges. That's incredibly important. At the same time, we know what our superpower is, right? We're not the policymakers, although like many of us have worked in the policy space, we're not the frontline service providers. We're in sports, we're about inspiration. And there is no movement in the history of the world that has succeeded without having that inspiration, without finding some point in the side of ourselves, our communities, that shared point of humanity that says there's something we can reach for that's better. And I'm a little biased, but there's no sport that's better than doing that than basketball. And so when we are able to say, alongside incredible partners and experts like JUMP, the folks who work on all of our issues, yes, criminal justice, also policing reform, community safety, voting rights, that we can stand up alongside them and say that the sports and entertainment world has a role to play, that we can be supportive, that we can use our talent in bringing people together and inspiring them and saying that this is something that we all can move forward with together. You know, there's nothing that's more powerful than that. And so for us, it is always about finding ways to play our position. You know, we love a basketball metaphor, but also ensuring that we are bringing more people into the fold and using what we have to connect others to the struggle.
Oh, that's great, and how an example of a brand in a business understanding their sphere of influence. As someone who has a policy and organizing background, I tell folks all the time, corporations and brands have significant influence on everything because we're all engaging in the economy in some way through entertainment, whatever it may be. To expand on that, JUMP works with a lot of business leaders on this work. Can you talk about that a little bit more and something that you'd like for folks to take back to their businesses once they leave South by Southwest?
Yeah, I think in this particular equation and the work that we do specifically around first chance and second chance employment, there's one stakeholder who has the power of yes, and those are the business leaders and the CEOs. And it's a very complicated and layered thing to talk about taking someone who historically has a stigma attached to them with this scarlet letter of having a felony conviction for, name a crime, and then ask them to come into your business and work alongside other folks and all of that, right? And so business leaders we work with specifically to teach them how to unwind and unpack the humanity behind what they see on a binary piece of paper that says, yes, you have a crime, or no, you don't. It used to be called ban the box, but now they do it in background checks for you. You don't have to check the box because they'll check it for you, right? And so I think business leaders need to be educated in the same way that we're asking talent to level up when it comes to closing the skills gap. Businesses have a responsibility to society too, especially in the places that they do business in. And that's what's so inspirational about organizations like the NBA, JP Morgan Chase, and others who have said, we actually have a choice to make. Not only about the labor pool, but what kind of society do we want to do business in. I was working with a corporation, a Fortune 100 corporation at their corporate headquarters, and one of the things they had on the wall is that they really believed in store safety for their stores. They have stores all across the country. And then I asked the question, I said, how can you have safe stores if you don't have safe communities, right? And immediately it clicked to them that they can't even have that in a given community unless your community is safe. And how do you build safety in a community? Well, people have to have access to opportunity, because no matter where you're at in the world, if you box people out of access to the things that they need, it's kind of like that Maslow hierarchy of needs, then what grows from that is usually an underground economy, anywhere in the world, right? And that includes substances, that includes all different types of things that we as a society say we don't want, right? And so the solution is really relatively simple, right, for business leaders. It's that once you are able to understand that you shouldn't be othering talent and that you're actually stopping yourself from growing. Like, I've had CEOs tell me, we can't grow because we can't get talent. Well, you're leaving millions of people off the table to look at who are great workers who want to work, right, for a livable wage, of course, right? So really working with business leaders to get them to understand that muscle and teaching them how to implement programs at scale is really one of the reasons why we work with business leaders. But also I would say, in reference to what you said with brands, when you look at somebody like Jamie Dimon, for example, who has a massive sphere of influence. For him to get on CNBC in the morning or get on a main stage at the Business Roundtable and say that his company, the biggest financial institution in the world, invests in people who come home from prison, not just by giving grant money through the foundation, but by actually hiring people and believing in that talent and actually folding that into the culture of the company. To me, that's what this work is all about, is how do you unpack and leverage that in all of these different areas with people who have the biggest megaphones.
You said something about Jamie Dimon, and it makes me think of when I tell people that most people just want to be seen, right? Their humanity is seen. And then also this piece about like what creates a safe community. I was talking with some folks around some criminal justice reform policies, and he said, you look at the safest communities, they're not over-policed. They're the communities that have the most access to opportunity, education, jobs, healthy food, clean air, like all of those things create a safe and healthy community. And it feels like the work that you all are doing together is to change people's mindset, right? To not try to identify as safety as over-policing, over-criminalizing something, but actually get to the solution where we're not even talking about that. We're talking about how we're seeing people for who they are and providing them the opportunity to live out their greatest potential.
When you talk about safety, I just want to interject one thing. I interviewed a woman a couple years ago, and she said something that I'll never forget. She said she was actually more fearful of getting out of prison than actually going into prison.
Wow.
And when we unpack that, it was really because she didn't know what awaited her in reference to opportunity. Would she have a place to live? Would she be able to get a job to feed herself? Would she be able to reunite with her family from a resource perspective, right? And when you think about that and you really unpack that, like that's deep, right? I'm more comfortable in prison than possibly facing all of the barriers and things that await me out there in the real world, right? And so that's the main reason, like, why it's so important for us to continue and press this work in that way.
I felt like that story just hit all of us. Well, my goodness, to even think about that. But again, this is the power of storytelling, right? This is why what's so integral to your work is the storytelling. And so we have an opportunity for the audience to ask some questions, but also get involved with this. So if you want to ask some questions, put it in your app, and we will take a few of those. As you're doing that, I do want to ask Larry to talk a little bit about this example with the Portland Trailblazers and what you all did in bringing some of this partnership and work around opportunity together. If you could share a little bit about that.
It's not necessarily the Portland Trailblazers, but we're working with 4 teams through the coalition that we have, through the relationship we have with the coalition. But I spent 4 years as the president of the Portland Trailblazers. And when I was about considering the job, being interviewed for the job, because Paul Allen, who was the owner, also owned the Seahawks, they had the NFL do the background check. And these guys went down to Philly, went into City Hall, into some of the back rooms, and found all of this information about my criminal activity. And they got it back to the person who was the hiring me at that point was a guy by the name of Todd Lewicki. And they got back to Todd with this information, and Todd was now a little conflicted because he definitely thought I was the right person for the job, definitely wanted to hire me for the job. But now he was concerned that if he shared this information with Paul Allen, who was the owner, that Paul would not be in support of it. So he said he actually reached out to David Stern, who was the commissioner of the NBA at the time, and he asked David, he said, look, I still want to hire this guy. And David, who I knew, David was like, yeah, I agree with you. He said, but do I have to share this information with Paul Allen? And he said, David told him, yeah, and I'm hearing all this after the fact. This was after my book had come out, after the story come out. Todd is sharing this story with me. And he said he reached out to David, and David said, you can't know this, hire this person, and not share the information with the owner. So you have to share this information with the owner. So he said he called Paul, and he kind of started to tell him, you know, what they had found and all. And he said, when he got done, Paul said, well, I got one question for you. He said, what's that? He said, how long ago was this? I said, I don't know, 20. He said, don't worry about it then. So they hired me anyway, even after they found out that I had this criminal background. But what that says to me was that they were hiring who I became, not who I was. They were hiring who I am today, not who I used to be. And I think that's what we need to consider when we're looking at people, we're looking at, providing opportunities for people. Hey, folks have stuff in their backgrounds. People have done things that they wish they hadn't done. But if they're willing to change their life and they want to change their life, then providing the opportunities for them to do that. But and the thing about it, they never told me, right? So I still was walking around nervous and afraid that somehow this would come out, but they already knew, and they hired me anyway, so.
Oh, that's powerful. And that's powerful to understand that there are people who have that mindset of, to your point, I love what you said, hiring who you are today and not the past. And as we know, a lot of undertone of this is that Black men, Black folks, Black and brown folks don't get the second chance that a lot of white people do, and that's some of the work that you all are addressing as well in the storytelling. So I want to go to some of these audience questions. They're actually really good, and this is where you can flex a little bit. What differentiates JUMP from other programs doing this type of work? I could brag on JUMP all day, because I do, but Ken, I'll let you start with that question.
Sure. I appreciate it, and I get really pumped up about being able to answer this question, because I think there's a couple things that differentiate us. One is that we've chosen a vehicle that we've been talking about here on stage, which is cultural influence and culture, to actually propel our issue. And so that access is something that most organizations don't have access to when you think about professional sports and the entrails to entertainment and cultural influencers in business. I think the other piece that's really important to us as an organization is looking at this from a holistic approach and not pecking these things off in silos. And so the nature of philanthropy and the nature of social justice work in general, typically organizations are forced to choose silos to represent. It's very difficult to do the whole pie. But we've chosen the course of Hannibal, and we're willing to go through the Alps and to get the job done. And I think that when we think about what it takes to unwrap the narrative that's existed in this country for the last 200 or 300 years, and we're talking about what I consider to be the most deeply entrenched issue in this country is crime and race, and the intermingling of those two things. The deepest things and the hardest things. Every political cycle, someone's talking about crime. Every political cycle, someone's talking about the othering of another group. This year, it's immigration and all this other kind of stuff. And so approaching it from the talent side. And it's interesting how we started to develop this. I was in a workshop with practitioners from all across the country, and everybody got to choose a small group to go into to talk about what the problem was. Specifically, it was the business leaders, and then it was like the policy stuff. And then I suggested we do a board about talent, and no one came to the small group. And when I thought about sports, ironically, I thought about when athletes make poor decisions and do things on the field or off the field, what is it that causes a GM, or an owner to give that person a second chance? In many cases, third or fourth chances, right? We've seen people cycle through 4, 5, 6 teams. It's usually because of the talent and the value proposition that person has, where they think they can extract a value to the team. And so I think we should approach it the same way. What kind of value proposition can I use to offset this stigma? And that's why our first thing is commitment to excellence. It's the first thing is how do we put people in positions to be skilled to compete against people who are walking out of some of the best universities in the country into the workforce, right? If we're talking about livable wage and access to the middle class economy. I think that's the first thing, and I like to call it looking in the mirror. And how do we skill up ourselves and put ourselves in the best position before we go out into the world and ask for the door to be knocked down or kick the door in if we have to. The second thing is, how do you educate businesses, right? A lot of organizations across the country are talking about what businesses are or aren't doing, but they haven't done the deep work, in my opinion, on change management and how difficult it is to go through risk management and talk about negligent hiring historically and kind of unwind some of those things from a council's perspective and a C-suite person's perspective. I think the third thing is we're underutilizing policy work in this country. There's a tremendous amount of meat on the bone around education and workforce development dollars, public-private partnerships, incentives for businesses. How can we be pro-business on this particular issue? How do we get CEOs in major forums to have conversations about the talent pools in this country that are underutilized, and how can we grow as an economy? It affects every single person in this country. And then, you know, the thing that we've been talking about the most is media and narrative, right? And the challenging thing is you have to do all four things together in a flywheel effect to get the momentum, to get the social movement that James was mentioning earlier. All social movements take momentum, and it takes several years, sometimes decades to do. Some social movements we're still fighting. I mean, we're still fighting some things that have been going on for centuries, right? But we have to understand that you can't do it with one prescription. You can't do it not talking to the other side. You have to bring all parties to the room. You have to throw all solutions at the table if you're going to unwrap something as deeply entrenched as the stigma attached to what it means to have committed a crime and what that means to society.
Can I ask you, James, well, for all the reasons Ken said, it's very clear why the MB Social Justice Coalition actually has done this big public partnership with JUMP. Can you just talk a little bit too about some of the work that you all have done to change some of these laws really quickly? And then there's a question that I want to get to that speaks on some of this race in the education piece, but I would love for you to just talk just a little bit on some of the wins that you've seen in this work.
Sure. A core part of our portfolio is policy advocacy, and that's the differentiator for us, and part of what we said is the meat and potatoes of the work has to be long-term. Because especially in the MBA community, we've had great community engagement work for a very long time, great philanthropic work for a very long time, but in 2020, the coalition was created to add to that and make sure that we were focused on how we drive the policy solutions that meet need over the long term. And in the criminal justice space, for example, Carl Anthony Towns was instrumental in advocating for justice reform in Minnesota when he was there, and restoring voting rights to 50,000 Minnesotans coming out from incarceration who otherwise would not have been able to vote. That change took a very long time, and there were these incredible advocates and community groups who'd been driving it for years. And he was able to step in and join arms with them to help push that across the finish line and ultimately get it signed. That's real change in action. It's Doc Rivers, when he was on our board, being active in clean slate advocacy when in Philadelphia, in particular, in Pennsylvania, passing clean slate legislation affecting 3 million people. That's massively important. The same thing in New York. It's the advocacy that so many coaches did on voting rights. And some of this, it's important to say, some of this, most of this in fact, does not win overnight, right? Like, we spend a long time doing advocacy on the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, critically important voting rights legislation. Voting rights legislation that's going to continue to come up because it did not pass, and that was one of our big pushes from 2021, our first year. But the whole point of our enterprise and the work that we want to do as a collective is to keep pushing in and make sure that we recognize, and that people coming to this work recognize, like, this doesn't change overnight. Big structural changes, they don't happen in the blink of an eye, but they can happen. And we have to continue reaching for those big things to make sure that win by win, fight by fight, looking at Michigan and what they were able to do on access to the ballot 2 years ago, like, those kinds of wins justify and vindicate all of the work, all the sweat, blood, and tears that so many people, who for most will be nameless and faceless, like, have put in the equity and the work to make change on. For us, bringing in a C.J. McCollum and his commitment to juvenile justice, making sure that J.B. Bickerstaff is able to bring his energy and passion for voting rights and access and anti-hate work, that's the stuff that makes a difference from our vantage point and allows us to hopefully blaze a trail for others to follow and continue to try and fight for those long-term policy changes.
When you said that, I thought about how what's so powerful about this partnership is, yes, we have NBA players using their platform, sharing their stories. What you all are doing with these JLA leaders is reminding them and showing them how powerful their stories are too, if not just as important, even more, right? And it's like kind of leveling the sphere of influence and giving them the confidence, and that is so powerful to see. And something, it's a unique partnership that I haven't really actually seen among brands and entertainers with folks who are directly impacted by this. So kudos to you all. Again, I told you I could brag about this all the time. So let me go to this question, because we're in a room full of educators. How can community college educators support this vision and expand educational opportunities for justice-impacted people?
I'll take a stab at that. I think building communities on campus that support people who've experienced justice involvement. So like in California, for example, they have something throughout the community college system called the Rise Scholars, which is dedicated to serving the problems and challenges that justice impacted students face. And so creating a support group community for them and having a dedicated counselor or somebody that is actually able to help them navigate things like financial aid and things that they wouldn't normally have faced. And then for us as an organization, I'm a big fan of apprenticeships. So dedicating and creating courses that serve apprenticeship work where people can actually earn and learn. One of the challenges for people trying to go to school and advance their education is they've already spent years in prison and they're up in age, and so when they get out of prison, if they're in their 30s or in their 40s, they also have to provide for themselves, because contrary to popular belief, the state is not providing people, free housing and free income and that type of thing. And so finding ways to do the earn and learn program where people can earn a living and then also have ways to pathway through the educational system, I think are a couple of the things. And the other piece I'd like to say about that is really just getting proximate. Brian Stephen talks about proximity all the time, and it's one of the things that we advocate for, is once you get proximate to the people in your community who've experienced these things, right? Hold a career day on campus, specifically geared towards nonprofits who serve in parole offices and probation offices who serve justice-impacted people. You'll be amazed at the amount of people that really come out and want to be involved with education but don't know how, right? That's why it's on us to be able to open up the apertures of access, because people don't want to sit in their community and do something that they know already is wrong. Like it's really like a struggle. I've been there, right? But if you don't know the pathway, then sometimes you feel trapped, and it's like, okay, well, this is what I got to do, or this is how I'm going to do it based on the fact this is all I can see. So it's on us to be able to give some visibility to some of those things and get close to the community. So I would say proximity is another big piece.
Yeah, I would just add to that, it was community college that gave me my start. But I got connected to that community college while I was still incarcerated. And I think if we can start putting more programs inside the prisons where people have an opportunity to start building their education, I think that would be incredibly helpful. In the state of Michigan, I was there about 1.5 years ago, went into a prison there, and there was a community college that was holding a graduation ceremony inside the prison for 25 people who were graduating with their associate's degrees. To me, that's the kind of program where these people will come home with a little bit of a head start because they already are kind of on a path. And I think, the community colleges being able to help provide that. Like I said, Michigan has 14 colleges that provide degree programs inside the prisons. To me, that's one of the things I think we should be pushing for, one of the things we should be trying to implement, because again, it gives people a head start when they come out. They already are kind of on a positive path before they even get out of jail.
I mean, I think that's the full circle. You literally wrapped up this whole conversation in the full circle of like what that actually looks like, and who knows, the next chairman of the Jordan Brands could actually be someone through that pipeline. So Larry, James, Ken, my friends, thank you all so much for the work and partnership that you all are doing and bringing this to South by Southwest EDU. And thank you all for being attentive and participating.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.